Hello, I'm Eric from Bosch, and I'd like to spend a few minutes talking to you about changes to angle grinder switches. The standard small angle grinder switch, which you'll find on a lot of products in use today, is simply a slide switch with the possibility to lock it on. It's changed slightly with new manufacturing regulations that kicked in a couple of years ago now, whereby the usual little ramp at the end of the switch is now removed, with the thinking that that really made it practically automatic that the switch would lock on even if you didn't want it to lock on. So this little ramp has been lost from the end of the switch. You can see on this small angle grinder here, it's just a flat top here. So switching the machine on and locking it on requires two mechanically dissimilar actions, if you understand what I mean by that. So just pushing the switch forward means that the switch is in a kind of dead man mode. It will only run while you hold the switch forward. The top of the switch needs to be pushed into the body of the grinder for it to latch, and commonly small angle grinders do have a lock-on facility. People like that for sanding and for grinding rather than having to hold on to a switch. But you do need to then push the front of the switch or the top of the switch into the body to make it locate. So I'll just demonstrate that. Hopefully that can be seen on shot. So pushing it forward, dead man, but then locking it in. And then, as you saw, we simply push the back of the switch to unlatch it and it stops. Pretty conventional stuff, but these subtle changes obviously are now imposed on the mainstream manufacturers and account for this slightly different shape. However, another factor has come to light recently, particularly off the back of, for example, the Olympics project, which had a very good safety record, and a lot of the standards they employed on site in terms of what type of tools they used and the style of those tools, those have now been followed up and are now being implemented with some major construction companies. And one of those considerations, one of those best practices, are to do with small angle grinders. So while this switch shape was our problem, if you like, as manufacturers, the nature of this switch in general became an issue on the Olympics site. And by that I mean it's now common that end users will require a small angle grinder, professional small angle grinder, that cannot be locked on. So it's impossible for the switch to be locked on. This, of course, is down to possibility of the machine kicking or flying out of control. The last thing you want in that situation is for the machine to still be running, still be hooked up to the mains and still powered up. So dead man switches are now becoming more commonplace in the UK market, and they're not mandatory by any means, but obviously they're built into good work practices for a lot of big end users. So the paddle switch, so-called, the paddle switch dead man type, is becoming more common and asked for more often. So this particular machine wouldn't fit that criteria. I'll show you one of our previous executions of a paddle switch, which is not uncommon across the market. Many manufacturers use this perfectly adequate paddle switch, which has a pivot point underneath the gearbox, and then this long paddle, which is quite easy to use, particularly towards the rear of the machine. The only requirement there is that there's a little lock-off tab here. So if the machine's plugged in and you grab hold of the motor, it doesn't start until you're ready. So you have to press down this little tab to enable the switch. This is a very comfortable switch to use, and it really does the job. However, it's quite common for you to grip the angle grinder in different positions. If you're simply cutting with the machine, you may hold the machine at the back here, the front handle, and all is fine. But with grinding applications, sanding applications, cleaning with wire brushes, this sort of thing, it's not unusual to actually hold the machine a little bit closer to the gearbox where my hand is now. And in this case, the spring, you heard it click just then, the spring which is holding this, which tends to make the switch disconnect like that, it becomes quite powerful. You've got no leverage here at the front of the gearbox, if you get my meaning. So I'm having to press quite hard onto the body of the machine to maintain the switch on and be able to use the tool. Now that obviously leads to fatigue. Generally speaking, if you're having to grip a power tool quite hard, quite firmly, this causes blood flow issues, circulation issues, and as you may know, with hand-arm vibration, if you're limiting the blood flow to your extremities, it makes you more vulnerable to damage long-term from power tools that create vibration. Of course, an angle grinder is one of those. So while this is common, this design of paddle switch, it's not ideal for all applications and does become a bit tiresome, particularly if you hold the switch towards the gearbox. So enter our take on the paddle switch. We introduced quite recently a range, not to replace our existing tools, but a range addition. This is the GWS 9115P, the P standing for protection. And what we have here is a so-called protection switch at the bottom. You'll recognise it as a paddle switch, but there's a twist. Instead of having the pivot at one end or the other with this problem with different spring tensions, we've got the pivot coming down this side of the machine. So it's a little bit more like a door than a paddle. So the benefit of this, of course, is that once the switch is activated, okay, it really doesn't matter where you hold the switch, whether it's at the top of the tool or at the bottom, the amount of pressure required to keep the thing engaged is exactly the same. So it satisfies the growing demand for a dead man switch very, very well. It's got the mandatory lock off tab here, so it can't be accidentally activated, but it does mean the tool is easier to use in all scenarios rather than getting more difficult to control as you close in on the gearbox there. So that's the take from Bosch on their professional angle grinders, and this illustrates how we're growing the range and obviously responding to market trends and requirements for dead man switches on professional angle grinders. So that's the protection series from Bosch. Thanks for watching.